Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Minnesota Rack Stars podcast. I am your host, Joe Call, and today we're doing a little housekeeping, and we're kind of going over 10 things to remember this hunting season. And maybe you've thought about some of these things, and maybe you haven't, and sparked some different ideas on some things that you got to keep in mind this year. So I just kind of wanted to go through 10 things that are kind of at the top of my list, some of the things that I want to make sure that I keep tabs on this year to kind of keep things in perspective a little bit, and make sure that I am putting the odds in my favor of hopefully harvesting the best buck possible. So that's kind of what's on tap for today. One thing too, just make sure you give us a like and subscribe on all of our social media platforms. And then also with that, we really do appreciate if you give us a 5-star rating on this podcast as well. We really do appreciate you guys and your support, and thanks for listening. Hey, if you're like us, you're getting ready for that upcoming hunting season. The one thing we always want to make sure of is that we have the best apparel possible to keep us out in the woods longer. And we've been paired up with Arctic Shield ever since the beginning. And what they want to do for you guys, the listeners, is give you a discount code to get you 20% off of everything on their website, which is arcticshieldоutdoor.com. And if you use the code RACK20, that's RACK20, you'll be able to get 20% off everything on their website. So take advantage of this offer right now. Well, if you're looking for a gift or just something for yourself, Minnesota Rack Stars related, I'll tell you what, you need to check out our clothing store that we have. The link is on our social media platforms and on our website, where you can go to it and order some sweet Minnesota Rack Stars swag and accessories. I'll tell you what, at the end of the day, when things are winding down, I'm going to put on a movie or watch some sports on TV. The first thing I do is I get into my Minnesota Rack Stars sweatpants and sweatshirt because it is so comfortable. And that's the thing, like, if you got a shirt or pants or whatever that are comfortable, you know what I'm talking about. And this fits it to a T. And I am not joking around. This stuff is so comfortable, and that's why we're going to continue to keep this store open online, because it's a great product, everything that they put out. And why don't you guys check it out, and I guarantee you, you'll like what you have on. So with that, we're going to get to the podcast here. Thanks for listening. Take two. Here we go. Let's rock. All right, guys. Welcome back. It is myself this week. And, yeah, I kind of like doing these podcasts every now and then. I tried getting some guests lined up this week, but it just didn't work. So I'm coming to you live by myself here. And we're just going to kind of wrap up our South Dakota trip that we went on this past week, and then also kind of the top 10 things in my mind that I kind of want to stay focused on this year, and some things for you guys to remember throughout this hunting season. But as far as the South Dakota trip went, it actually went really well. We had good conditions going out there. I think my truck ended up getting like 19 miles to a gallon going out there, and about about a little over 20 miles per gallon on the way home. So that was always a good thing. But the one interesting thing that we've kind of picked up here recently, it just seems like every time we go out to South Dakota, there's some big fire that we encounter, and it's no different this go around. I think it was last year we saw 2 fires. Well, we were in the stand last year, and all of a sudden the air just filled with smoke, and it was actually a fire that was north of us. I want to say for sure 10 miles, and then there was a sunflower field, I think, that went up in flames while they were harvesting, and there was a north wind and everything just pushed right down to us, but it fell. I mean, I saw ashes coming down. I mean, that's how big that fire was. So that happened, and then that this past, was it spring or fall? I think it was this last fall, too. Anyways, there was a vehicle on the side of the road that was hauling a trailer, and the tire fell off, and the rim was hitting the tar and sparked flames, and we actually saw the guys going out there trying to put the fire out, but it was too late. It just took off, and I want to say it ended up burning like 5,000, maybe plus. I think it was actually 8,000 acres that ended up burning. So this year was no different. As we were on our way out there, we were looking to the west, and sure enough, there was all this smoke, and I looked at Jerome. I said, well, it better not be the ranch that we're hunting. That wouldn't be good. But as we got closer, it was I think it was a wheat field that they were combining, and the combine, story goes, the combine must have got a little hot, sparked something, and the combine didn't burn up, but the field was engulfed in flames. And I'll tell you what, I've never seen two combines hauling the mail like those guys were. The debris flying out of the back of those combines was pretty wild. They were hauling the mail trying to harvest as much grain as possible there before the flames got it. So that was kind of interesting. But yeah, it just seems like there's a fire every time we go out there. So yeah, we made it out there. We did our our housekeeping things. Our goal was to get out there, um, you know, download the pictures off the trail cameras, because this last spring we went out there turkey hunting and we set up our trail cameras on normal trail cam mode, and then we put solar panels up there with them, and both cameras were still running. But the only problem we ran into was we didn't factor in how much the grass was going to grow, and it ended up taking a lot of pictures, put it that way. so we had the grass we had to deal with, and then also Jerome's camera, where the cover covers up the switches and everything on the trail camera. Somehow a cow or calf or maybe even a deer broke that off, and we had to run into town and get some supplies to fix that. We had to get some Gorilla Glue, and we got some extra batteries just to make sure these cameras stay working, because we switched them into cell mode now. But that's a couple things we're going to keep into consideration, that we've already made that adjustment as we hung our cameras up a lot higher to factor in the growth of the grass, and then also just to stay out of reach of the cattle, because the cattle are the ones that give us the biggest issue with our trail cameras out there. But yeah, we switched that up, and it's crazy is I'm trying to tactic out there. I've tried this tactic around here before, but I'm trying to tactic out there in South Dakota. That'll hopefully bring in and kind of keep deer in the area a little longer. We tried this tactic out there, and as soon as we set the trail cameras up later that night and then the following night, both of our cameras had good shooter bucks on. So we're pretty excited about that, the tactic that we're using. And I've actually got a little plan that I'm working on here that I'm going to kind of release to the public here, hopefully within a week or so. I'm going to try to get the ball rolling on this. And to be honest with you, it's something that people have used before, but I'm taking a little different twist on it. And yeah, I'm excited to share that information with you guys, and hopefully can make a little something out of this and kind of help some people out that maybe don't have resources like I have to help you out in the woods. So I'm looking forward to bringing you guys that information, but for right now, I'm going to keep it on the down low, and we'll just say that for now, I guess. But yeah, so we went out there, we did that, we got all our sets set up, our tree stands were up, that was all good. We hopped up in them, made sure that everything was set and safe and ready to go, and I am just jacked up about all of our spots out there. Every year we go out there, we learn a little bit more, and there's more to be learned, but right now we've just continued to make little adjustments, and hopefully this year will be the year that we capitalize on it, because we've been in the money, we just haven't came home with it yet. So we'll see this year. I got a good feeling about this year. Every year I go out to South Dakota, we got a pretty good feeling. But the other cool thing is as we were out there, we went into town later in the evening to grab a bite to eat, and sitting there talking with the local bartender and the locals around there, and all of a sudden there was a guy that walked in, and we're way out in South Dakota. All of a sudden there's this guy that showed up, and he had a WeFest staff shirt on. And I've worked up at WeFest for many years. This year I did not, but I've worked up at WeFest for many years, which is a big country music festival up in Detroit Lakes. And this guy walks in with a WeFest staff shirt on, and we started BSing with him a little bit, and come to find out he's from Detroit Lakes, and he's the one that's kind of in charge of putting up the big stage that they perform on, the musicians perform on. So that was pretty cool to chat with him, because we had a lot of stories to share about WeFest and how things have gone there. But if you've never been there before, it used to be, for sure, I don't know, maybe it still is the largest country music concert in Minnesota. I know there's a couple other ones that are pretty big as well, but this one used to be the biggest one because it used to be the only one around. And now there's a lot of country music festivals that people go to and don't really congregate there as much, even though there's still a lot of people there. But yeah, it was just cool to see somebody from Minnesota. We had some common things to talk about. So yeah, that was It was pretty cool, and the people out there are always so awesome, really nice, kind, and always really good to talk to, and we have a good time. So yeah, that's one thing we always look forward to is heading into town and just meeting new people and talking, and maybe some people that have been there before that we've met that kind of built some relationships with as well. So that kind of wrapped up South Dakota. I'm excited to get out there. That for us, being it's private property that we hunt, yeah, it opens up here in a couple of weeks. I don't know if we'll be heading out there to start the season, but we'll for sure be getting out there October. And if we don't fill our tags, we'll be heading out there in November as well. Because that's when, to be honest with you, that's when I really like hunting out there the best. It gets pretty wild. So yeah, and as far as hunting goes, this is the reason why I'm kind of doing this podcast today. Like I said, getting fired up. I had a couple trail camera pictures come in, and people are sharing, trail camera photos and all that good stuff. And we get so caught up in what we're going after and what we're targeting and this and that. And I just wanted to pump the brakes here a little bit before things get really wild and really hectic, and just kind of remind everyone, and myself included, don't get me wrong here, I'm reminding myself because I'm guilty of a lot of these things too. And I was up at about 3 o'clock this morning and wondering what should I do a podcast about, and this was the one thing that kind of came to mind. Just pump the brakes a little bit and remind yourself of doing these things, not only to, put odds in your favor of hopefully harvesting some game, but also just really making sure that you're doing this for the right reasons. So we're starting out here with the first one of my 10 things to remember this hunting season. The first thing I want you guys to remember is, everybody's watching your cameras, and, more than likely there's a good percentage of you out there that have a good buck on trail camera, right? And everybody gets so caught up in, how am I going to keep this buck on my property, and how am I going to be able to kill this buck, and my neighbors don't get it, and this and that. You got to keep things in perspective, right? And the first thing I have here is, like I just said, keep things in perspective. A mature buck, typically lives on 300 to 600 acres, and I mean it's moving around, and it could be more than that, depending on the habitat. And oftentimes it is a lot more than that. Now there are some deer that will have smaller core areas, but for the majority of the deer, they're all over the place. I'll get a deer on my trail camera here, and it'll be on the other side of the section here. And, this section that I live on is, I think it's 3 miles by, I think it's a 2-mile section. I mean, it's a pretty big section. There's a lot of woods, there's a lot of swamp, there's a lot of, habitat here for the deer, and they're all over the place. So if you get that big buck on camera, just be realistic, keep things in perspective, do things to, try to increase the odds of a deer coming over to your property and hanging out on your property. But understand that that deer is probably not going to stay on your property, especially if you have 20 acres, 40 acres, whatever. He might be there a decent amount, but obviously everyone knows that once they lose that velvet, they shift a little bit and deer start moving around. You might get a new deer that moves in closer to your place. The buck you had on camera all year might take off and go a different direction. So, I mean, enjoy the trail camera fun. Don't get me wrong, but just keep things in perspective. All of a sudden somebody shoots a deer that you've been watching on trail camera, and people get ticked off because, that was the one deer that they were going after. That's the one thing I try to do is when I end up getting a deer on camera is just be like, okay, this is sweet. This is really cool that this deer is around. I'm going to do things that I feel like I can do on my property to increase the odds of them being around here. But being a realist here, the chances of that deer being on my property when I'm out in the stand, it's tough odds, right? And that's why I'm doing this, to keep things in perspective, right? So that was number one. Just like I said, be realistic when you get these trail camera pictures, and when it's time to hit the woods, have fun, get after it, but don't get too psycho about it, all right? So there's number one. Number two, remember, deer do eat weeds and natural vegetation, right? And the reason why I have this on here is because I've I've fought it in my mind so many times when I'm putting in food plots and all this stuff. Like, oh my gosh, there's a weed, and I got to get that weed out of there or whatever. It's got to be perfectly manicured and all this. Um, there is one thing that's on my mind right now in one of my plots, and that is water hemp. And I've been battling that this year. I've rotated my field, my 2 acre field that I have, um, into beans this year, and I've never had water hemp because it's always been corn. Now I put beans in there, and all of a sudden these weeds. If you've listened to a previous podcast, I was talking to Travis about when I sprayed and everything was turned brown, but then all of a sudden there was this patch of green that didn't die off, and I'm like, what the heck is that? Well, then all of a sudden I investigated a little bit after I sprayed it again, that it wasn't dying, and I kind of looked it up, and here it's water hemp. So I had to do a few adjustments. I got a hold of one of our family friends, and he has beans, and he battles water hemp, and he ended up giving me some of the spray that he uses, and it killed it off. But there were a couple spots that I missed that didn't overlap as much. So there's a few little strips that I missed, and sure enough, that water hemp's coming back up. So I need to get back out there and just kind of hand spray that and get that taken care of. But the one thing is that my beans really didn't fill in as well as I want them to, and I knew that was going to happen. I knew there was going to be a lot of browse pressure on my field, but the only trouble with that is when you have those openings in there and the beans don't canopy over, well, then obviously you're going to get more weeds coming in. So I've sprayed my field 1, 2, 3 times now, and I'm done with it. I'm gonna take care of the water hemp that is, about 1.5 feet tall right now. But the rest of it, I'm going to let that whatever fill in. I'm done spraying. But like I said, deer do eat those weeds, and that's one thing you got to keep in mind. Don't get too stressed out with your food plots when it comes to making sure all the weeds are out of there and everything is coming up perfectly. To be honest with you, what I did this year is where my brassicas usually go. I had rye that was germinating, and it came up, just basically reseeding itself because I had rye in there the previous year. So there's a decent standard rye, not as thick as I wanted it to be, but there's a decent standard rye. And I just came in and I seeded and I sprayed all the weeds that were coming up, and the rye had already dropped its seed already. I think actually the rye dropped the seed after I sprayed, so hopefully that rye will germinate again. But also I threw those brassicas in there, and those brassicas are germinating really well. So my plot isn't going to look pretty by any means, but I really don't want it to. And this is getting to another another topic we're going to get to here. But when I was talking to my father-in-law who was hunting this spot last year, I asked him where he was seeing most of the deer. And I had corn up in this spot last year, and I had brassicas. And he said most of the deer are in the tall weeds over there where I have a bunch of pine trees planted, and they're working through the natural weeds and vegetation that's coming up over there. So this year I was like, well, I'm going to switch that up, and I'm just going to put brassicas in there with the rye and just leave everything stand. Last year I brush hogged everything down and let the brassicas come up, and now I'm switching it up a little bit. I'm just going to leave that stand and kind of give the deer a little extra protection, while they have the food inside of there. So don't get too overwhelmed if your food plots don't look like, the jury's on TV and everyone else, showing their video and photos of their beautiful food plots, because deer will also eat those weeds in there too. And I actually was listening to a podcast, and they were talking about the nutrient content of natural browse out there, and you'd be amazed on how much nutrients natural forage provides deer. So keep that in mind. Don't be too discouraged if the weeds kind of take over a little bit in your fields. So keep that in mind as well. The other thing here, number 3, okay, so we're moving on. We're getting to number 3. Don't chase the trail camera, all right? So if you're chasing a trail camera, you're going to be a step behind every single year, and I've done this before, and that's why I'm getting away from, the trail camera mode. with cell cameras, like all of a sudden you get a picture of a deer. It's like, okay, now it's the time to get in there and hunt. Well, you're too late. And the one thing you need to do, and you hear a lot of people talk about it, you know, don't focus so much on this year's trail camera photos. You got to look back at last year and previous data on trail camera photos when the bucks are moving in your area, and then you jump in there and try to be ahead of the trail camera and don't chase it. I know I was speaking with someone this past summer here, and when it comes to studying trail cameras, you know, this individual showed me a picture of a really good buck, and I'm like, okay, there's a reason why this deer moved at 9:30 in the morning. You know, deer like this shouldn't really be moving a whole lot at this time of day. So what we did is I told him, I said, go on Weather Underground and tell me what the weather was doing during that time that buck was moving. And once you know it, uh, the wind was coming out of the north, and then all of a sudden it switched from the east. It started coming from the east. And this deer was, in my mind, bedded on the south side of a woods, and that wind was coming from the north, so he was able to see everything in the open, but then also smell everything that could be coming through the woods. And then that wind switched and it started coming from the east. Well, here he wouldn't be able to smell what was ever coming, from the north. So he moved to a different spot, a different chunk of woods, where in my mind he was bedding on the edge, the west edge of the woods, because the wind was coming from the east. And we started connecting those dots a little bit, and it was kind of a light bulb moment for the individual that was showing me this camera or these trail camera photos. But that's the one thing you want to try to do is kind of correlate deer movement, buck movement with weather and history and all those things. And a lot of times, especially when things pick up a little bit, deer will kind of do the same thing over and over year after year. So and everybody knows this. When the deer move in on your property, and it's the same time kind of each year. However, there are some factors with, different fields being planted, so that could play a factor. But for the most part, like around here, there usually isn't a whole lot of velvet photos until the leaves fall off, or I shouldn't say leaves fall off, but the velvet falls off, and then there's a lot more bucks that end up showing up in this area. So that's the one thing you want to do is make sure you know your history and don't sit there and wait for intel to come in tomorrow. Focus on last year and the year before and kind of keep that data with you. And hopefully, like yourself and myself, hopefully that makes this a little more successful. But I've seen a lot of things play out over and over and over again. There's a property that I hunt there that every year it's pretty quiet, but then all of a sudden that last week of October, boom, daylight picture, the biggest bucks that we have on camera. So it's one of those spots where, you know what, maybe we stay out a little bit until that time comes around, and then we go in there and try to harvest a nice buck. And that's it just seems to be a reoccurrence every single year. So try not chase the trail camera this year and try to be ahead of it a little bit. Number 4 here. Respect the land and your neighbors. And when I'm talking about respecting the land, there's a lot of things that can go a lot of different directions. But one thing that stands out to me is when all of a sudden I see these pictures shared on social media of a bunch of deer carcasses laying by the parking lot of public access and all this stuff. Be respectful, like not only to the land, but also to the game as well, right? Make sure you're taking shots that are ethical. Make sure you're disposing of things properly. Make sure you're being respectful to other hunters out there. Also, not only public land, but also on private land, your neighbors, all those things. That's just one thing we got to keep in mind. I mean, it's one of those things where hunting can get really competitive, and people start acting in ways that maybe they normally aren't accustomed to doing. But like I said, it turns really competitive at times, especially if there's one good buck in the area. You'll see a bunch of people just circling areas to try to get that deer, and it just can turn into a mess. So just one thing I wanted to hit on is just make sure we're respecting the land, the animals, and your neighbors. And I guarantee you're going to enjoy things a lot more when you're out there in the woods. Number 5, here we go. Know your wind and know your thermals. And it's hard to really understand this to a high level. I mean, it's kind of confusing at times for some people. But I had firsthand experience, not only in the woods with deer and stuff, where you know the deer are walking right by me, and I can feel the breeze blowing right to them, and they don't even flinch. Well, it's because it was in the morning, and the thermals were rising, and all my scent was carrying over the top of them, so I was safe. The other aha moment I had was I was disking my field one time, and there's a little low sway in my field, and I was working my way from the north going south, and the the dust was coming from my backside and pushing in front of me. I was going at a slow pace, and it was just pushing in front of me. Well, then I got to the end of the field on the south, and I turned around and I started going to the north, and the dust was doing the exact same thing. It was coming from my backside and pushing forward. I'm like, what the heck is going on here? Well, once I got to the top of my field, I could see all of the dust accumulating down into this low portion of my field and being sucked down into the lowest part of the field. And those were those thermals coming down in the evening, because that's when I was disking up my field, was in the evening. There was no wind, so I could see all of that dust being suctioned right down into the lowest point of the field. And that's the one thing that really stood out to me, was like, boom, there's those thermals going down. But to actually see it happening with the dust that I was creating from disking was really eye-opening. It's always hard to understand things when we can't see it, right? A deer and a bear and a dog will trust his nose, basically over anything. Or us, we trust our eyes more times than not over anything. And to actually see all that dust being sucked down and not just kind of dispersed throughout the field really was eye-opening for me. So just understanding, when you're going out to hunt, what your thermals are doing. Do some research on how thermals work. I know in bluff country and stuff, it's crazy. It's wild out there. I don't really hunt a whole lot of that, so I really don't pay attention to that. I'm more flat ground, open ground type of hunting, but just something to pay attention to. I always say, as far as wind goes, when playing the wind, if the wind is blowing to the west and there's a deer west of me, I might not be able to see it, and that deer might not be able to see me, but it can smell me, right? And I always say it's like playing cards with your cards held backwards, and you can't see it, but the deer can see it, and that's how it works. And there's a study that I want to talk to you guys about here in a little bit on something that was really interesting that I heard on a podcast here this last week, and I'll just talk to you about it right now. Actually, the heck with it. There was a study going on, and these deer were being collared, and they had to get the collars off the deer for some reason, and the deer were still alive, or they wanted to switch out the collar or something. I don't know. But anyways, the people that had to go out there and track the deer down knew the area that the deer was. And in order to push the button on their controller, they had to be within 100 yards of this deer. And it took them 2 weeks to get within 100 yards of that deer to disconnect that collar from that deer. Now you think about that, a deer that they know basically exactly where it's at. I mean, the location was putting them really close to where this deer was. And they couldn't get 100 yards from this deer to get the collar off. And I'm almost 100% sure that it was in bluff country, so that made it even more difficult, because that deer was positioning themselves in a bulletproof spot, right, where they could see one direction and they can smell coming from the other direction. So it just shows you how difficult it can be. Trying to play the wind, trying to play the thermals. Deer senses are absolutely amazing, and it just shows you how difficult it is to get close to a deer, especially a mature deer who has been around the block a few times. But just talking, going back to wind and thermals, those deer can smell you coming from a ways away. And then, like I said, even if it's not wind isn't blowing, that doesn't mean your scent isn't being pulled in a certain direction because of thermals. So I thought that was a really interesting podcast, and I don't know the name off the top of my head what the podcast was, but it was a really good study, and I think it's a 2-hour long podcast, and I'm only maybe 45 minutes into it, but there's some really good information on there about deer behavior, and I just thought that was really, really interesting that they couldn't get 100 yards from a deer to get the collar off, and it took them like two weeks to finally get it off. So it just shows you how hard it is to hunt, especially mature deer. Alrighty, here we go. Moving on. Number 6. Stop drinking the Kool-Aid. And what I mean by that is there are so many things on social media now, and I try to put my content out as just different ideas, and you see and hear a lot of people on social media really push things, and a lot of times it's because of it's something they're selling. If you pay attention to people really talking highly of certain things, their name is on a package somewhere trying to sell those things. And the one thing is I like to do is I try to think outside the box, and I try not to sit there and I do consume a lot of content, don't get me wrong, but I always take it with a grain of salt and think to myself, okay, what if this or what if that? And it's all situational, right? I listen to a lot of podcasts when I'm mowing lawns, but anyways, there was one podcast I was listening to where a guy does aerial drone surveys, and he promotes himself as doing deer surveys. And the one interesting fact that he brought up was, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of acres that he has surveyed. He said that he has only seen one deer bedded in switchgrass. One deer out of hundreds of thousands of acres. I think that's what it was. One deer. There's been one deer bedded in the switchgrass. And, there was a big push for switchgrass, and switchgrass was the next best thing. People are now planting switchgrass where they don't want deer to go. It's crazy, but if you listen to people, they're talking about how switchgrass is absolutely amazing. Now, this is where you got to really think about things, right? Switchgrass is probably amazing for that individual in their area with their surrounding habitat that they have. Is your habitat where you're hunting similar to this individual's, or is it totally different? The person that was doing the survey said that deer will prefer a heavily wooded area versus switchgrass. That's what he has seen. The amount of deer that are in heavily wooded areas outweighs the amount of deer that are in the switchgrass. So if you have a wooded property and, is switchgrass the best thing for you to do to clear cut your woods and throw switchgrass in there? If you want to give it a try, go for it. But I'll tell you what, I don't have that kind of money. So keep that in mind when you're watching stuff on YouTube and listening to podcasts. Play those things out before you go and start spending hundreds and thousands of dollars on these things people are trying to sell you. Take everything into consideration. Understand the habitat that they're hunting. Maybe they're hunting in an area where everything is tilled up and there's no timber around. Well, then, yeah, switchgrass might be great. I know of places that are in wide open country, and they said the best years that they had were when everything was in CRP. Well, the reason why that is because there's no other cover around there. So yeah, CRP grass would be phenomenal. But from my understanding, this person who flies this drone around everywhere says the large majority of the deer are in the woods, and that's what they prefer. So keep that in mind when it comes to consuming content and all that stuff. And don't just, well, somebody said we should do this. Let's do it. Uh, Try to think outside the box. And one thing that I was doing this year, thinking outside the box, was, everybody talks about, clover plots. That's one of the largely discussed topics throughout the spring and in summer. Is a lot of it's clover plots, and everybody kind of ends up doing the same thing. You're either going to spray your whole plot or you're going to mow your whole plot or whatever. And I switched things up a little bit this year. I'm just mowing, and my weed control is phenomenal. This is the best clover plot I've ever had due to the amount of rain we've been getting, the cooler days that we've had this summer. That's really helping the clover and chicory thrive in these conditions. And the weed control is phenomenal in there just by mowing it. But what I did is I didn't mow my whole clover plot. I only mowed half of my clover plot. So I'm getting my clover at different stages just to kind of see what deer prefer. And I've kind of been realizing some things with this little trial that I'm doing right now. And I like what I'm doing right now. I really do. It's just providing deer with different stages of growth throughout the life cycle of the clover and chicory. And I've really come to realize a few different things that I'll share with you guys in another podcast. But I like that strategy. And to be honest with you, I think there was one other person. There's always going to be somebody out there that says, hey, we've done this for years or whatever. Well, that's cool. I've never heard of it before. I'm giving it a try, and I've seen some success with it. So I'm going to keep doing that. But if I would have just sat there and just kept reading and listening and doing what everybody else says all the time, I'm just going to be plateaued out and just like everybody else. And to me, that kind of goes along with like our rules and regulations. I was listening to a great podcast the other day where an individual was talking about state regulations and how states could be better. I don't get it sometimes when, where people are satisfied, is the state satisfied with where our hunting is at? Or is the state satisfied with the amount of hunters we have out there? To me, in my mind, and this is the type of individual I am, I'm never satisfied, to be honest with you. I always feel that there's room for improvement. And until you are number one almighty, there's still room for improvement. And even at that, I would still be looking to improve. And I just get frustrated sometimes when states dig their heels in the sand and they just say, nope, this is the way it's always been. This is the way we're going to be. It's like, well, if we look at our hunter recruitment numbers and where we're at, our numbers aren't there. So why are we happy with where we're at? What type of adjustments are we going to do? The other thing that I this is me personally, this is my own personal thoughts and whatever. I'm the type of person where give me the crappiest team because I want to work my tail off to beat you. And that's what I used to do when I was younger in school. I got to a point where in my grade or whatever, we go outside for recess or we're in Phi Ed class, my team would usually win. And it was really easy to win whether I was captain and picked the best players or somebody else was captain and they picked me to be on their team right away and we'd win. Well, I got sick of being, I don't know, just winning all the time. So what I did is I started picking the players or the kids in my class that were not good at whatever we were doing. And I did it for a couple different reasons. A is because I wanted a challenge, right? And that's why I bow hunt, is because I want a challenge. And going down that road, which the direction I want to go, that's not for me. I want a challenge. And that was the one reason why I picked those players. But the other reason is I wanted to give those kids an opportunity to be picked first for once, because they were always picked dead last, and I felt bad for them. Like, you know what, I'm always picked first. I'm going to pick somebody else this time, and I'm going to stack my team with players that aren't very good, and we're still going to try to beat you. And if we don't, well, too bad. We're going to get you next time. But I just think too many times people are looking for an easy win. And that's, in my mind, that's the introduction of crossbows. And that just, I don't know, the season we have, or the season is, the person that was on this podcast was talking about if Minnesota wanted to take strides and leaps and bounds in the right direction, move your firearm season back. These other states giggle at us when they hear that our firearm season starts the first week of November every single year. They just laugh at us. And you see these other states that are taking off and having great hunter recruitment numbers, and they're getting people in from out of state and all over the place and paying thousands of dollars to get a tag there. And why not take some of the things that they're doing and implement them here versus doing the total opposite, because that's who we are and we got to stay separate from other people. I don't know. I'm always looking to improve, and when you stop looking to improve, you're either too bullheaded or you just don't really care, So that's the one thing that I just thinking outside the box and stop drinking the Kool-Aid. That was kind of my point here on number 6 is like, be your own individual, do your own thing, get some ideas from people, but then let that spark a new idea instead of doing, well, so-and-so said to do this or so-and-so said to do that. Be your own person. Try to develop that next thing or whatever it is. It's a lot of fun and trial and error. That's the biggest thing, and that's how you learn, right? So just keep that in mind as you move forward. Number 7 here, moving on. Sorry, I went down a little rabbit hole there, but number 7, know your regulations. Is the biggest thing. All the states' rules and regulations should be out. I got to make sure I go through ours here and then also South Dakota, just make sure that I'm on track, that I'm doing the right things. But that is a big thing. And along with that, number 8 here, make sure you buy your license early. I know last year, 2 years ago, Mike, my brother-in-law Mike, and I were doing a podcast the night before the opener. I was like, Mike, I don't have my license yet. And you know why I'm saying buy your license early? A, so you don't forget. And then B, every single time you buy your license the night before the opener of the season, there's always a system failure where things are shutting down because the system's getting flooded. Get out there and buy them early. Last year, obviously, I had that was terrible. That was a nightmare. When I was going to South Dakota, it was the day or two. It was 2 days before, week before going to South Dakota. My uncle calls me up, and we're sitting there talking, and he goes, "Yeah, make sure you don't forget your license." And my heart just stopped. And I did not order my license. And out of state, obviously, they have to mail you the license and all that stuff. And it was a complete disaster. I had to call multiple places to kind of get my license lined up. I had to call a friend of mine to go pick it up at the office, the DNR office, and it was just a complete cluster. So there you go, tip there for you. Get your license and get it early, and make sure you know your regulations as well. Number 8, safety, right? Make sure you know where you're shooting, what's beyond your target. Make sure you're checking your stands. I actually want to do a podcast with a buddy of mine when he mans up and he's ready to come on this podcast with me. I'm talking to you, Andrew. Andrew Ocho Cinco Petron Patron, not Ruckert. Okay, I just wanted to make that clear, right? I want you to come on and talk to us about tree stand safety, because this individual had a little incident a while back where he was caught in a really difficult situation out in the woods, and there was hardly anybody around, out in the middle of nowhere, and he had an accident. And I'd like him to come on and just kind of tell that story, and then also just to kind of make sure everybody's doing their due diligence and making sure safety first, so we're not either misfiring and hitting somebody or falling out of a stand. And then also safety harness. I can't believe there's still people out there that don't wear safety harness. And somebody asked me there, "Hey, do you wear safety harness?" Like, yeah, like it's not even a question. I wear it every single time. It doesn't take long to put on. You throw it on there, boom, you strap yourself to a tree, and you got nothing to worry about. Your stand breaks, boom, you're attached to the tree. The only thing you have to worry about is maybe a tree falling over onto you or your tree tipping over or something. But for the most part, I mean, you should be pretty safe if you're locked into that safety harness. But think safety, and hopefully you guys have a really safe hunting season this year. Number 10, I think I'm on number 10. I don't think I missed any so far, but we're going to go to number 10. And one thing is, make sure you soak everything in this year and share the tradition. Um, this last turkey season here, I brought my daughter out there. I'm sharing that tradition with her, and I'll get her back out in the stand again this year for deer hunting. She's not old enough to carry a firearm or a bow out there yet, but I'm going to get her out there, and that's the one thing you got to remember is I've experienced this firsthand where I've always been a part of a hunting party. And, I was right there. I lived near the hunting party and where we all went hunting. But now I have my own place. I have my own properties that I hunt and permission properties. And don't get me wrong, it's a lot of fun, but it's nowhere near what it was when I was around everybody every single night. Like after the hunt, we would stop, at my uncle's place or wherever, and we'd get together and we'd talk about, what we all saw and kind of just share those experiences that we had out in the field. And now I get home and it's kind of like, oh, let's get the kids to bed and, get cleaned up and call it a night. Where if somebody was out there with me and meeting up back at the shack or whatever, that's a lot of fun. And that's what makes hunting. Yeah, is it fun to shoot a big deer? It is an absolute blast. However, it's not as fun as shooting a big deer and sharing those memories and moments with other people. And that's what's obviously the best. So keep that in mind. Make sure you soak it in this year and share that tradition with somebody else. Introduce somebody, to the outdoors and let them experience that as well. I'm going to throw a bonus one in here for you because I talked about this in another podcast before. Be thankful for the opportunity that we have. And this kind of goes back to, being respectful to your neighbors and the property and the animals out there. Be thankful for what we have. God has given this opportunity to enjoy the outdoors and enjoy the creation of, white-tailed deer and being able to go out there and hunt them. It's a great opportunity, and I'm so thankful that we get to do this, and you guys out there and gals get to go out there and enjoy hunting because it is a blast. You guys that are out there understand and know what I'm talking about, how exciting it can be. And like I said, I'm actually in the process right now. My clothes are in the wash. And we have a screened-in porch. I'm going to be putting my clothes out on the screened-in porch, and they're going to be out there the entirety of the season. And as I was going through my hunting closet, I found the book that I'm going to be bringing with me out in the stand this year. And I mentioned this to other people that there was a Bible that this restaurant was giving out, and people donated just for people to take. And it's pretty sweet. It's camouflage, and it's the Bible, and it's about 4 inches by 2.5 inches or so. And I got that in my backpack, and it's going to help me remind myself to be thankful for the opportunity that I have, not only with my family and friends and all that stuff and life itself, but also for hunting and the game that we have to go after and chase, and just kind of keep things in perspective throughout the hunting season here. So I'm going to be reading that book, and hopefully I can get through quite a bit of it, because I've never read the whole thing, put it that way, and that's my goal this year, is to really try to dive into that, to really help remind myself of, what, I am really thankful for the place I have, the family that I have, the friends that I have. I'm surrounded by a lot of great people, and I'm extremely thankful for it. And then also hunting on top of that, and the absolutely amazing whitetail deer that we get to chase. So there's my top 10 with a little extra bonus there, number 11. I hope you guys are getting excited. Some states are already open. For us here in Minnesota, we got a little while to wait yet, but just kind of wanted to run down all those things that are going through my head right now. I hope that helps you guys a little bit, spark some different ideas for you guys to get after it this year and hopefully be successful. And with that, we're going to shut her down. I hope you guys have a great day. Well, thanks for tuning in this week, you guys. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Just some good reminders, not only for you guys, but also for myself, and just things I want to keep in mind as the season goes along here, just to kind of keep it fun. Sometimes all of a sudden it can get a little too competitive, or your mind starts going down the wrong direction because you're the one that had the trail camera photo of this big buck, and now all of a sudden somebody else is going after it or gets it or whatever. I just wanted to kind of keep things in perspective there with everybody and myself. I hope you enjoyed that. Like I said earlier, make sure you like, subscribe, all of our social media content. Also, we appreciate 5-star ratings on this podcast, and Also, share this podcast with other people too. We really appreciate everything that you guys do. There are a lot of people out there that haven't been exposed to podcasts yet, so it'd be a great idea for you to share that with someone who really enjoys the outdoors and listen, talking, hunting. So with that, like I said, every time we appreciate you guys and all that you do for us. Also, we appreciate our partners at Arctic Shield, Domain Outdoor, J&R Outdoors, Skullcraft, The Fish Guide, Tacticam, and Fourth Arrow Camera Arms. I hope you guys are getting excited for the season. I am jacked up. It's almost here. And can't wait to get back in the woods. So with that, I hope you guys have a great week and take care.